Okay, we'll go in 5, 4, 3, 2. Happy Monday morning. Unless you are a Patriots fan, then it's just a regular sad Monday morning. And there's 3 Patriots fans we just figured out on this call this morning. I'm here with my co-founder and our editor-in-chief, Jeremy Burke, and Miguel Martin, the CEO of Aurora Cannabis. Miguel, I didn't know this before we jumped on before, but you are a New Englander by birth.
Yeah, not by birth. I was born in Mexico, but we moved to a little town on the coast of Bath, Maine, and had no choice but Patriots, Celtics, Red Sox, Bruins. And, you know, when I was younger, it wasn't so great, but we had a great run. And, you know, I think, as you said, we played with house money last night. Not our best game, but it was fun to see them out there.
Yeah, we'll get back there. Even if it takes 4 long years, we'll get back there, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I know everybody hates that, but yeah, I think
we've been
back.
Spoiled for sure. And I will say, on the Canadian front, we traveled, I was telling you, through Maine up to Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and PEI. That's very Patriots country up there too. Loads of Patriots fans up there. And I guess they're sad Patriots fans this Monday morning. But we wanted to connect with you. You and Aurora had your Q3 earnings report last Wednesday. Give us a bit of the news, and then we'll get into some of the big issues.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, and Jeremy, for having us. You know, it was a very strong quarter for Aurora. We announced our third quarter. Importantly, global medical cannabis, which is really our focus, grew by 12% to a record $76.2 million. Overall, we had revenue of over $94 million, and delivered adjusted EBITDA of 18.5, all with no debt on the cannabis business. So, our strong focus on international medical cannabis continues to be real strength for us, and you saw it in the results in the quarter.
Go ahead, Jer.
No, go ahead. Yeah, I'll jump in next.
I was going to say, I go back on the Canadian front to 2017, and the way the market has developed and evolved there, Aurora from day one was going to be one of the big players, but the big players have gone in different directions, I would say. Talk a little bit about sort of the direction that Aurora has taken, even vis-a-vis others, and not ignoring necessarily the adult use market, but really doubling down, tripling down, and quadrupling down on the medical market, both here, but also abroad. And do you see that continuing for Aurora, and are other people going to see what Aurora is doing and try to catch up?
It's a great point because, unlike most industries, whether that's alc-bev or, different sort of pharmaceutical or even CPG, when all your primary competitors are sort of focused on the same thing, Canadian cannabis is not the case. Right. You've got some that are really focused on recreational cannabis. You've got some that are focused on domestic. And then you've got some, like us, and we're really one of the first, and I'll answer your second part in a second, that is focused on medical cannabis, reimbursed models, conservative, regulatory forward models. And, today in Canada and around the world, it is the fastest growing segment of cannabis, and it's also the most profitable. So Aurora, going back more than a decade, started out as one of the Canadians' first medical cannabis companies. So that's our roots. We have a world-class genetics facility out on Vancouver Island. A lot of these world-class products are developed, and then we have some of the largest GMP production facilities in the world in Canada, shipping products around the world, and then we're proud to have a facility in Germany. So that is our focus. We have seen others, both a couple of the US MSOs as well as some Canadian companies, start to see the importance of medical cannabis, really there. We think we have a head start, but we're seeing others get into it.
Miguel, can you talk a little bit about, the advantages Aurora has in being a Canadian company, able to export, able to look at all these international markets, maybe compared to some of your US counterparts?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jeremy. And when you look at Canada, first and foremost, you have experience with regulators. And so whether it's, the core regulators you have in Canada or the very challenging regulators you have in all these markets like Germany and Poland and UK and Australia, that takes a lot of experience and a lot of wherewithal to be able to navigate that and to be able to develop, produce, and sell compliant products. And the Canadian companies absolutely have an advantage. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, because we have a long history with the reimbursed medical model, particularly with veterans, which we're very proud to be one of the largest providers of medical cannabis to veterans, you again can navigate those different markets, which are a real challenge. And lastly, it is one of the best places in the world, to produce medical cannabis, which is a very energy intensive,
Right.
product to produce. We produce predominantly indoor. And if you look at energy costs, if you look at high skilled labor, if you look at the with the category, Canada, in our opinion, is the best place in the world to produce these products.
Can I also ask one sort of dive down it? And I think most people in the industry understand this, but the way we grow in Canada versus how many or most or all grow in the States is very, very different. I mean, it's almost a pharmaceutical model, a GMP model, not an easy bar to reach, but a necessary one if you want to be in the medical cannabis space, in Canada, but also be exporting around the world, because those regulators in Poland, Germany, the UK, Australia, this is what they demand.
Yeah, I mean, Jay, it's a great point. When you go into a Canadian GMP facility, say one of our facilities that are outside of Toronto, those are pharmaceutical facilities. So you're gowned up. They are certified with all the regulatory agencies on a 3-year rolling basis. The focus and the dedication on the genetics, the production, the diligence, and everything that goes into being a GMP certified facility is very different than what you may see in other parts of the world. The regulators from Germany, as an example, it's an on-site physical visit. And these pharmaceutical auditors, that are visiting some of the largest pharmaceutical production facilities in the world, coming, in our case, to Toronto to do that. Now, it takes a lot of work to get there. It's very expensive, a lot of experience. You have to have, proper QA people, science and genetics, manufacturing. Many of our folks come from pharmaceutical backgrounds. But once you can get there and you can meet those incredibly high standards, you can take advantage, of better economics in these markets. And so, we have that history. We've seen others struggle with it. But, to your point, these are really strong pharmaceutical facilities, not maybe what most people would expect from a cannabis production facility.
Yeah, I have my own beard net.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that I bring with me.
Beard net, hair net, double gown, no rings, no watches, extensive, on the bioasset side, all of it. It is. These are, true pharmaceutical GMP facilities.
Miguel, I want to open the rescheduling can of worms in the U.S. Right? I think Trump's executive order was historic. At the same time, this is now an administrative law process, and I think progress within administrative law is a lot slower than the private sector might want. So, would love to get high level first. Like, how are you thinking about rescheduling? What is happening, and what isn't happening? When you have these conversations internally.
Yeah, it's a great point, Jeremy. We for a long time have focused on federal legalization, and we're very encouraged by the states that are passing medical and rec, but it is not a federal construct. And because it is not a federal legalization, it doesn't allow a company like Aurora, the Trade Act, to come into the U.S. And that doesn't change with Schedule 3. And so I think, let me take the positive part of it. So the first part of it is Schedule 3, allows a more, favorable tax treatment. Very importantly, it allows an expansion of medical research, which is something, we've been deeply focused on in Canada and around the world. And 3, it does give an indication that whether DA or importantly, the FDA will start, to look at these products. We've long believed that the FDA is a critical voice, in the federal legalization of the registration and the authorization of these products. And so it is our opinion that this starts the process, but, there's a long way to go. Now, with federal legalization, you'd get interstate commerce, you would get FDA regulation, and you'd get a variety of different sort of components, all of which the Canadian companies have been doing for a decade or more. And so this idea of what it would take to get there, there's been a lot of interest in speaking to Canadian companies' medical side, which is what President Trump announced. He announced a medical framework, medical research, the potential introduction of CBD into the reimbursed Medicare model, similar to what you see, in Canada, again, with our veterans and others, as well as you see in Europe. So I think slowly but surely you're getting there. But, what I would, say to your listeners, if you're looking for positive news around the legalization of medical cannabis, You need to look no further than Europe. Some of the biggest, countries and economies in the world, Germany, Poland, we're seeing stuff out of Italy and Spain, the UK, Australia, which may be the largest, and expansion, places like Switzerland and Austria, some early news out of Ukraine and Turkey. And so all of that factors into a global standard, which will color what the FDA does and what U.S. regulators will do. And so there's a lot of positive news globally. I know it's not the U.S., but you can start to see where it's going.
Can I ask a question? I'm not sure it necessarily impacts Aurora, but what you just said about the FDA and being a pivotal part of this for how you sort of think about it. My sense is that maybe not the MSOs, but cannabis companies overall in the U.S., that really makes them nervous, right? In that, like, they're not up to those standards yet, and to get there would be, well, backbreaking or company breaking. Like, if you were a CEO of one of those companies, you don't have to put yourself in those shoes, but like, would even that sentence with the word FDA in it make you nervous?
I guess. I mean, probably. I think you're right. I mean, first and foremost, FDA regulates everything, from toothpaste to tobacco. This idea that somehow cannabis is not going to be, in that sort of regulatory framework. They have a history with Epidiolex, which is the only registered product, single molecule product on the market. If you look at what they've done around, other products like alcohol and tobacco that have sort of a similar piece, it's really hard to understand how the FDA is not going to have a regulatory role in cannabis in the U.S. So yes, that is daunting for, an American company. But again, that expertise exists very close. They're, their closest neighbor in Canada, been doing it for a decade. Health Canada, the regulators in Germany, all have a similar science-based regulatory approach to what you would see from the FDA. And so you can get there, but yes, it takes a long time, takes a lot of money, takes a lot of work. But again, it makes it a more consolidated, piece of business. You're not competing against 100 and 200 people. And then the other part, Jay, is this interstate commerce. You would expect that at some point that would be there. So it's not going to be 50 different standards for 50 different states. You have a federal standard, that would get there. So I don't see a path without the FDA playing a role or regulating these products. And if so, I think, the history and experience Canadian companies have, and some European companies have, would definitely play a role. And I would expect American companies would start to, investigate and want to partner with Canadian companies as an example, to get there.
Yeah.
I just want to pick up quickly on the federal standard. I mean, as a Canadian company that operates globally, like, how can the industry, push for effective federal standards in the U.S.? Like, how can the industry better get its voice heard? And I raised that point because, we had Senator Kirsten Gillibrand at our event about 10 days ago, and she was sort of the mind that the industry needed a little bit more effective advocacy in DC. And so I'm wondering, Miguel, how you think about that and how there can be the sort of unified voice for, effective standards that work for both consumers and the industry as well.
Yeah, I think it's hard because it's such a young industry, and you look at, what you normally have a lobbying effort, which is these, large multi-decade sort of federal relationships amongst like-minded companies. And we have not seen that.
Right.
The investments that some companies have made, like say an Altria or other companies that deal with regulated products, they've been very effective, in DC and with state capitals to try to move this forward. So, in my opinion, I think the industry needs to self-regulate and find a couple of core standards, whether it's on product safety, youth appeal, marketing, and consolidate that, and then get to, the regulators. This idea, though, that the only good regulation is no regulation, I think is a non-starter, and makes it very difficult, for elected officials to get there. Now, the good news is with President Trump's announcement, as he was surrounded by all these medical professionals, there is increasingly, information about the medical benefits of these products. And I think, to me, that's the foundational point. How do you tap into that? and grow off of that, sort of piece about the benefits. We're seeing in Canada, many of our patients are using it as they transition off opioids or pain management or PTSD or a variety of other indications that they, their, prescribing physician have picked, which I think, is an interesting point for a lot of Americans that don't understand that. Outside of the US, you're going to a doctor, having a consultation, getting a prescription, and then in most cases going to a pharmacy or having a pharmacy delivered it to you. That's a very traditional medical pathway that you don't sort of see in the US. And so I think to answer your question, if you can start with that medical sort of core component of the product and use that as a lobbying effort, I think many of the elected officials would be more supportive of that than this sort of general opinion that it should just be, a free-for-all, and that, the only good regulation is no regulation.
Right.
That's fair.
Right.
And I also think what you said about like-minded sort of industry people, I'm not sure that exists a whole cloth. I think I think it's even more fractured now with sort of hemp-derived beverages and edibles in the U.S. It's like a circular firing squad sometimes around federal advocacy, which is not necessarily the case in Canada anymore, right? I think there are lobbying groups in Canada that look for tweaks here and there, or it becomes very challenging once it's federally legal, like in Canada, for the regulators to pay attention, is my sense. Like they think it's done, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, I think unfortunately in Canada, there are many, to your point, that would say that they've done everything they're going to do and that's sort of it. Now, I don't think anyone can forget that the Canadian government's done more for legal cannabis than any other market in the world, and so we are very respectful of that. But when we talk to regulators and elected officials in Germany and Poland and around the world, they are learning from the Canadian experience, but they're also applying their own standards. And in many cases, they're quite stringent, and they treat cannabis like any nation. But with those high standards become high opportunities. And, in Canada, as an example, you need about 30 companies to get to about 60% market share in rec. In medical in Canada, 3 companies, including us, make up about 60 to 70% of the business. And so there is a lot more consolidation because the challenges and everything that goes into being a successful medical, company that you don't get in rec. So it's a high bar, but if you can get there, the benefits are pretty significant.
Interesting. Yeah, it's I find it fascinating, especially sort of having been in the industry for some time, to sort of watch the evolution not only of Aurora but the other companies too, and which direction they chose. And your sort of initial comment about zigging while they're zagging, or zagging while zigging, is good advice in business overall. But it is an interesting one, and also just the numbers you shared about the growth in some of those other markets is astounding, really, right? Germany, Poland, like some of the other countries, it's the opportunity right now.
Yeah, I mean, these are huge markets, and when you look at, you're talking about an increase of 30, 40 times year over year in a place like Germany. The vast majority of these products do come from Canada and our Canadian products into that market. And so I think these are big economies, and they definitely influence. We're seeing Australia had a positive influence on other countries around it. We are seeing places like Turkey and Czech Republic and Macedonia and whatnot continue to work that way as well. And it's the same companies. If you can navigate and get your products into a Poland, you can get them into these new markets as well. And they're all looking for these very high standards in terms of product testing and whatnot, which you don't see particularly in sort of the rec market in Canada.
Yeah. We're coming up on time a little bit here, Miguel. What should our viewers, our listeners look forward to coming out of Aurora for the next quarter and the next year?
Yeah, listen, I think it's more of the same. We've been on this journey for the last 5 years, focused on a global medical cannabis. If you look at our results, the generation of free cash flow, just no debt on the cannabis business. The story that cannabis companies can't make money is just not. And if you can take advantage of these incredible global opportunities that exist, the margins are very strong. And so in our opinion, there'll be a couple of companies that have the proper genetics, production, and regulatory expertise that will win. And this market is growing. And I know there's a lot of tough news out of the US, and we'd all like it to move faster, but there's plenty of opportunities, internationally. And Aurora is going to be one of those companies to win. And so we're excited about that.
Great. Well, we appreciate your time this morning.
Yeah.
We're sorry about the New England Patriots. It's we'll get them next year or something like that. That's how the saying goes.
We will.
We appreciate the time. Appreciate what you're up to, and thanks for making time. And everybody on the Cultivated side, we'll be back again tomorrow. Thanks, Miguel.
Thanks so much. We appreciate it.